The will was being read in 40 minutes. Savannah Hayes stood in the marble hallway of her father's estate, phone pressed so hard against her ear that it left a red mark on her cheek. 3 calls, 3 voicemails, 0 answers. Daniel, the man she had paid $800 to show up tonight and pretend to be her husband, was gone. His number now disconnected, his profile on the agency website already deleted, as if he had never existed at all. Someone got to him first. The thought arrived quietly, but it landed like a stone dropped into still water. She pushed it away. She didn't have time to be paranoid. She had 38 minutes to walk into that room as a married woman, or she would lose everything her father had spent his life building. She turned and looked at herself in the hallway mirror. Black dress, pearl earrings her mother left her, hair pinned up because her father always said she looked like her mother when she wore it that way. She had tried so hard to look like she had her life together. She looked terrified. The Hayes family estate was full tonight. Cousins she hadn't spoken to in years, lawyers in stiff suits, and business associates her father had trusted more than his own blood. Everyone had come because Richard Hayes was gone, and where Richard Hayes left money, people always followed. Her cousin Ethan passed her in the hallway, pausing just long enough to adjust his cufflinks and smile at her. "Nervous, Savannah?" "Not at all," she said. He glanced at her bare ring finger, just for a second, and that smile stretched a little wider before he walked away. Her stomach dropped. He knew. Somehow he already knew. She turned fast, moving through the crowd toward the far end of the room, where the guests were still mingling before the reading began. Her eyes scanned faces, lawyers, old business partners, a city councilman she vaguely recognized, until they landed on someone she didn't recognize at all. He stood near the window with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her bakery's monthly rent. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that were doing something unusual for a room full of people pretending not to be greedy. They were completely calm. Not bored, not distracted. Calm. Like a man who had stood in dangerous rooms his entire life and learned to breathe slowly in all of them. She didn't know his name. She didn't have time to care. She crossed the room, stopped beside him, and without looking directly at him, said the words so quietly that only he could hear. "Please, pretend to be my husband tonight." She felt him go still. Not startled, just still. The way a person goes still when something unexpected becomes suddenly interesting. He turned his head slightly and looked at her the way people look at a puzzle they didn't know they wanted to solve. "And why," he said, voice low and unhurried, "would I do that?" "Because I need you to." She finally looked at him. "My father's will requires me to be married to inherit the company. The man I hired to help me tonight just disappeared. The reading starts in 30 minutes, and if I walk in there alone, my cousin Ethan gets everything. He will gut every charity my father built, sell the assets, and not lose a single night of sleep." She stopped, steadied herself. "I am not asking you to lie forever, just for tonight." He studied her for a long moment, long enough that she started to feel foolish. Then he said, "I don't want to pretend." Her heart collapsed. She nodded stiffly, already turning away, already calculating whether she could still find someone, anyone, in the next 29 minutes, when his hand closed gently around her wrist. Not forceful, just enough to stop her. She turned back. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a simple gold wedding band, as if he had been carrying it there like a pen or a business card, and slid it onto his finger without a word of explanation. Then he offered her his arm. "My name is Vincent," he said, "and we've been married for 2 years. We met in Florence. You hate mushrooms. I always order them anyway." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Shall we?" Savannah stared at him. "You just said you didn't want to pretend." "I don't," he said simply. "I want to help you." He nodded toward the gathering room, where the lawyers were beginning to call everyone inside. "There's a difference." She didn't understand that distinction yet. She would later. But right now, with 28 minutes on the clock, and Ethan already watching them from across the room with an expression that had gone very, very still, she took Vincent's arm. They walked in together. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when something shifts without anyone being able to explain what. Ethan's smile disappeared. The lead attorney looked up from his papers, glanced between them, and made a small note. And Savannah, for the first time since her father died, felt something she hadn't expected to feel standing inside that house. Safe. She didn't know who Vincent really was yet. She didn't know about the empire he ran in the dark, the enemies who feared his name, or the reason he'd been carrying that wedding ring in his pocket. She didn't know that her father had known him for 20 years, or that saving her tonight was never going to be as simple as one evening and a borrowed ring. But the door to the reading room closed behind them, and the will began, and for now, the man beside her was her husband. What happened next would change everything. The will took 40 minutes to read. 40 minutes of legal language, asset breakdowns, and the kind of silence that only exists when a room full of people are pretending they don't care about money while caring about nothing else. Savannah sat straight-backed beside Vincent, their arms touching, her hands folded in her lap to hide the fact that they wouldn't stop trembling. Vincent didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, didn't do any of the small human things people do when they're uncomfortable. He simply sat beside her like a man who had decided to be there and saw no reason to second-guess it. When the attorney finally read the marriage clause aloud, the primary heir must demonstrate an active, verified marriage at the time of inheritance, Ethan shifted in his seat across the room. Just slightly. But Savannah caught it. She also caught the way he looked at Vincent, not with confusion, with recognition. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. The second came immediately after, when the attorney set down his papers and cleared his throat. "There is one additional condition," he said, in the tone lawyers reserve for announcements that will ruin someone's evening. "The marriage cannot simply be declared. It must be verified over a period of 30 days, proof of shared residence, joint accounts, and at minimum 2 witnessed public appearances. After 30 days, the inheritance transfers officially and permanently." The room exhaled. Ethan leaned back in his chair and smiled at the ceiling like a man who had just been handed extra time. Savannah felt the floor tilt beneath her. She found Vincent in the hallway afterward, away from the crowd, standing near the same window where she'd first approached him. He had his phone in his hand, but wasn't looking at it. 30 days, she said. "I heard. This wasn't the agreement. There was no agreement," he said, turning to face her. "You asked a stranger for help. I gave it. That's all tonight was." He paused. "But 30 days is a different conversation." Savannah crossed her arms. "I won't ask that of you. It's too much." "You're not asking." He slid his phone into his pocket. "I'm proposing." She stared at him. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He glanced toward the reading room, where Ethan was still visible through the open door, laughing with one of the lawyers. "But I know what happens to that company if Ethan gets his hands on it. And I knew your father, which means I know what it cost him to build it." The air between them changed. "You knew my father?" she said quietly. "We'll talk about that," Vincent said. "Not here." Something in his tone, careful, deliberate, the words of a man who measured everything he said before he said it, made her stop pushing, for now. He handed her a card, a hotel name, a room number, nothing else. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Come alone." She almost didn't go. She sat in her car outside the hotel for 11 minutes, arguing with herself, before she walked inside. Vincent's penthouse suite looked less like a hotel room and more like an office that happened to have a bed in it. Screens, documents, 2 open laptops, 3 phones lined up on the desk. A man in a dark suit stood near the door and left without being asked the moment Savannah entered. Vincent was already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. In daylight, without the noise of the estate around him, he looked different, sharper, more real. He told her the truth before she could ask a single question. "My name is Vincent DeLuca." Savannah went still. She knew that name. Everyone did. The billionaire investor whose acquisitions had reshaped 3 industries in the last decade. Brilliant, private, and ruthless in every boardroom he entered. "I know who you are," she said carefully. "No," he said. "You know what I allow people to know." He leaned forward, which is considerably less than what's actually true. She waited. "I run things, Savannah. Legitimate businesses on the surface. Underneath, a network that most governments pretend doesn't exist." He said it plainly, without drama, the way someone admits to something only when they've decided the other person deserves honesty. "I am very good at protecting people, and very dangerous to cross." The silence stretched. "And you want to help me because—" "Because your father saved my life 20 years ago," he said, "and I have never fully repaid that debt." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it and felt her throat tighten. A photo, taken from outside her apartment window. Her, that morning, making coffee. The timestamp read 6:42 a.m. Someone had been watching her before she even knew she needed protecting. She looked up at Vincent. He was already watching her face, and she understood then that he had been expecting this moment. That this was the real reason he had come to the estate, the real reason he hadn't walked away last night. "Someone wants your inheritance badly enough to threaten you for it," he said quietly. "And they've already started." He slid a single document across the table, a 30-day agreement, clean, simple, 2 signatures required. "You're not alone in this," he said, "but the decision is yours." Her pen touched the paper before she had fully decided. Sometimes the body understands danger before the mind catches up. She signed. The files were not supposed to exist. Savannah discovered them on a Tuesday, buried inside a locked drawer in her father's private office at Hayes corporate headquarters. A drawer she only found because the building's old maintenance manager, a quiet man named Otto who had worked for Richard for 30 years, pulled her aside before she left the estate and pressed a small brass key into her palm. "Your father said to give this to you," Otto told her. "Only you, after the will was read." He folded her fingers around it. "He said you'd know what to do with what's inside." She hadn't known, not at first. The drawer contained a single manila folder, thick with documents, and beneath it a leather-bound ledger so old the corners had softened to felt. She carried both to her father's desk, sat in his chair, still faintly smelling of the cedar cologne he'd worn her entire life, and began to read. What she found didn't look like the records of a corporate empire. It looked like the records of a secret life. Richard Hayes, to the public, had been a sharp businessman, successful, philanthropic in the measured press release way that wealthy men often were. A donation here, a scholarship fund there, his name on a hospital wing. But these files told a different story. Anonymous shell companies, each untraceable on the surface, each quietly funneling money into women's shelters across 4 states. Scholarship programs operating under names that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know to look. A network of food programs, legal aid clinics, transitional housing initiatives, none of them bearing Richard's name, none of them connected to Hayes Industries publicly. He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it in secret for years because he hadn't wanted the credit. He had just wanted it done. Savannah sat very still for a long time, looking at the numbers. The total, across everything, across 20 years of quiet generosity, was staggering. She hadn't known. Her own father, and she hadn't known any of it. Then she reached the ledger. Most of the entries were coded, initials, dates, amounts transferred, but one set of initials appeared more than any other, running through nearly a decade of entries. V.D. Vincent arrived at headquarters within the hour of her call. He came alone, which surprised her, and he looked at the ledger the way a person looks at something they hoped they'd never have to explain. "How much do you know?" he asked. "I know those are your initials," Savannah said. "I know my father was moving money through companies that don't officially exist, and I know you told me he saved your life, but you didn't tell me what that actually meant." She closed the ledger. "I'd like the full version, now." Vincent was quiet for a moment. He moved to the window overlooking the city, hands in his pockets, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than usual.
20 years ago, I wasn't what I am now. I was 23, running money for people I shouldn't have been anywhere near. Federal investigators were building a case, and they needed someone on the inside to confirm certain names. He paused. Your father was one of those names. He'd done business with the wrong people once, years earlier, without fully understanding who they were. The investigators approached him, offered him complete immunity if he gave them what they needed. Savannah felt something tighten in her chest. "And?" He refused. Vincent turned from the window. He didn't protect himself. He protected everyone connected to those dealings, including a 23-year-old who didn't deserve it. He told the investigators he had nothing to give them and accepted the consequences. His jaw tightened. It cost him 2 government contracts and nearly destroyed Hayes Industries. He rebuilt it quietly over years, without ever telling anyone why he'd lost those contracts in the first place. The room was very quiet. "He never told me," Savannah said. "He wouldn't have." Vincent said it without hesitation. That was who he was. She looked down at the ledger again. "And the entries? The money connected to your initials?" "I've been funding his programs alongside him for 9 years, anonymously, through different channels." He said it simply, no performance in it. It was the only repayment he would accept. He refused everything else. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite grief, but close to it. He was the most stubborn man I have ever met. Despite everything, Savannah almost smiled. Then she turned to the last page of the ledger and stopped. There was a handwritten note in her father's unmistakable script, added recently, the ink still crisp against the aged paper. "If you are reading this, then it has already begun. The danger is not outside the company. It never was. Trust V. Find the cabin. The answer is in the fireplace." Savannah read it twice, then she looked up at Vincent, who was watching her carefully, and she realized he hadn't seen this note before. His expression told her that clearly. Whatever her father had planned, he hadn't shared all of it, even with the man he trusted most. "There's a cabin," she said slowly, "in the mountains. My father took me there every summer when I was a child." Vincent was already reaching for his jacket. "How far?" he asked. They never made it to the cabin that day. Savannah had one stop to make first, her bakery. Small, warm, tucked between a bookshop and a dry cleaner on Mercer Street, it was the one place in her life that had nothing to do with inheritance or family names or the complicated wreckage her father had left behind. She had built it herself, with a business loan and 4 years of 6 a.m. mornings, and she loved it in the uncomplicated way you love the things that are entirely your own. She told Vincent she needed an hour. He agreed, but when she arrived and unlocked the back door, she noticed his black car parked quietly across the street. He hadn't gone anywhere. She didn't know whether to be annoyed or relieved, so she settled for ignoring it and tying on her apron. Her 2 employees, Maya, 22 and perpetually cheerful, and old Mr. Patel, who handled deliveries and pretended not to have a sweet tooth, were already inside prepping for the morning rush. Normal, warm, flour on the counter, coffee brewing, the radio on low. For exactly 40 minutes, it felt like her life. Then the delivery van arrived.
It was a white van, logo-less, which should have been the first sign. Savannah's actual suppliers all used marked vehicles, but Maya had already buzzed them in through the back before Savannah could register the detail, and by the time the back door opened, 3 men were inside, dressed in delivery uniforms that fit just wrong enough, moving just fast enough, eyes scanning the room rather than looking at anyone in it. Savannah knew immediately. "Maya," she said, her voice steady in a way that surprised her. "Go to the front. Take Mr. Patel. Lock the counter door and do not open it." Maya looked at her, looked at the men, went. The largest of the 3 stepped forward. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't need to. His size alone rearranged the air in the room. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "we just need a conversation." "You could have called," she said. "We tried the polite approach." He reached into his pocket and produced a single document, a legal transfer form, Hayes Industries letterhead, requiring her signature to voluntarily relinquish her inheritance claim. "Sign this, walk away from the will, and whatever your father got himself mixed up in dies with him, quietly." Savannah looked at the document, then at the man holding it. "Who sent you?" He smiled. "Sign the paper." The back door exploded open, not dramatically, no Hollywood kick. It simply opened, very fast and very hard, and 3 of Vincent's men came through it, with the quiet efficiency of people who did this kind of thing regularly, and found it largely unremarkable. Within seconds, the room reorganized itself entirely. The large man dropped the document. His 2 companions found themselves against the wall, with a speed that left no room for argument. Vincent walked in last, straightening his jacket, scanning the room once to confirm Savannah was unhurt. She was holding a rolling pin. He looked at it briefly. "Were you planning to use that?" "I was considering my options," she said. The large man ran. He made it through the back door and halfway down the alley before Vincent's team had the other 2 secured, and Vincent himself went after him. Not running exactly, but moving with a focused, ground-eating speed that didn't look like effort. Savannah watched from the doorway as they disappeared around the corner. She looked down at the transfer document still on her floor, picked it up, read it carefully. It was professionally prepared, legal language, proper formatting, notary line at the bottom. Someone hadn't panicked and sent thugs. Someone had planned this, prepared paperwork, and expected her to sign under pressure. That wasn't desperation. That was strategy. 14 minutes later, Vincent returned, alone, jacket still straight, not visibly winded. Behind him, 2 of his men escorted the large man back, zip-tied, unhappy, a cut above his left eyebrow suggesting the alley had not been entirely cooperative. They sat him in Savannah's storage room. She didn't ask what Vincent said to him in the 10 minutes he spent alone with the man. She stood outside the closed door, listening to nothing. No shouting, no sounds of violence, just the low, controlled murmur of Vincent's voice, which somehow seemed worse. When he came out, his expression told her everything before he spoke. "He's hired muscle," Vincent said. "Doesn't know much, but he knows enough." He handed her the document she'd left on the floor, now folded. "Someone inside Hayes Industries commissioned this, not to hurt you, not yet. Just to frighten you into walking away voluntarily." "Which means they know a forced removal would draw attention," Savannah said. "Exactly." He looked at her steadily. "This wasn't random, Savannah. Whoever is behind this has legal resources, inside access, and enough patience to plan carefully." He paused. "And they moved the moment the will was read, which means they've been waiting." She thought about Ethan's smile in the hallway, the way he'd glanced at her ring finger, the way he'd looked at Vincent with recognition, not confusion. "It's family," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Vincent's silence confirmed it. She set the document on the counter, smoothed it flat, and looked at her bakery. Flour still on the counter, coffee gone cold, the radio still playing softly to an empty room. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow, we go to the cabin." The cabin smelled like pine and old wool, and something Savannah couldn't name until she stepped through the door and felt it settle over her like a blanket. Childhood.
The drive had taken 3 hours through winding mountain roads, Vincent at the wheel, both of them mostly quiet, in the way people are quiet when they're thinking hard about the same thing but aren't ready to say it yet. His security team followed in a second vehicle, peeling off at the base of the mountain road on Vincent's instruction. Whatever was in that cabin, he'd decided, was for the two of them only. Savannah hadn't been here in 11 years, not since her mother's funeral, when her father had driven them up here alone, made hot chocolate on the old gas stove, and sat with her on the porch without saying a single word. Just sat. The two of them watching the tree line until the sun went down. She hadn't understood it then. Now she thought maybe she did. This was where Richard Hayes came to be honest. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, a sleeping loft, the kind of kitchen that only needed to do basic things. Her father had kept it deliberately simple. No smart screens, no security system, no trappings of the empire he ran from his city office. Just wooden walls lined with bookshelves, a stone fireplace wide enough to stand in, and a photograph above the mantel of Savannah at age 7, holding a fish she'd caught, grinning so wide her eyes had disappeared. She stood looking at that photograph for a moment longer than she intended. Vincent moved through the room slowly, examining the bookshelves, the desk in the corner, the way the furniture was arranged. Not touching anything yet. Just reading the room, the way she imagined he read everything, carefully, completely, looking for what wasn't immediately visible. "The note said the fireplace," Savannah said. "I know." But he was still looking at the bookshelves. He pulled one out, a worn copy of a Hemingway novel, checked behind it, replaced it. "Your father wasn't careless. He wouldn't make it easy to find even with the directions." "He made it easy enough for me." Vincent glanced at her. "Which means he designed it for you, specifically, not for anyone who might find the note first." He moved toward the fireplace. "Think about what only you would know." Savannah approached the fireplace and crouched down. The grate was cold. The cabin had been closed for months. She looked at the stone interior, the blackened walls, the iron grate, the ash that had settled and hardened into a pale gray crust along the base. Nothing obvious. She sat back on her heels and looked at the photograph again. 7 years old. That fish, the way her father had laughed when she caught it. The real laugh he saved for moments when he forgot to be Richard Hayes and was just her dad. "He used to let me hide things in here when I was little." She stood quickly, moved to the left inner wall of the fireplace, and pressed her fingers along the seam where 2 large stones met. The mortar there was slightly different, smoother, newer, a shade lighter than the stones around it. You would never notice unless you were looking. Unless you had spent a childhood pressing your small hands against these exact stones during rainy afternoons. She pressed firmly on the 3rd stone from the bottom. It gave. Not dramatically, just a quiet mechanical release, a panel of 2 stones swinging inward on a hinge, revealing a gray metal safe embedded in the fireplace wall behind it. Vincent was beside her in an instant. "Combination?" he asked. Savannah didn't hesitate. She turned the dial to her birthday, then her mother's birthday, then the year the bakery opened. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single sealed envelope and a small USB drive with a strip of masking tape across it, her father's handwriting reading simply, "Play this first." Vincent produced a laptop from his bag. Savannah plugged in the drive. The video opened without preamble. Richard Hayes sat at this exact desk in this exact cabin, wearing the gray sweater he always wore on weekends. He looked tired but composed, the look of a man who had thought carefully about every word he was about to say. "Savannah." He smiled briefly, the way people smile when they know a camera is watching, but they're trying to pretend it isn't. "If you're watching this, then I didn't get to finish what I started. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things I didn't say while I had the chance." Savannah's throat tightened. She didn't move. "Someone inside the company has been using our legitimate subsidiaries to launder money for the better part of 6 years. I've been building evidence carefully.
Too carefully, maybe. Too slowly. His expression hardened. I designed the inheritance condition because I needed to buy you time and protection simultaneously. I needed someone in your corner who couldn't be bought or threatened. I think you've found him already. I suspect you found him the moment you needed to. Vincent went very still beside her. The complete evidence is inside headquarters. Archive room, sub-basement, filing cabinet 7. The key is in the envelope. He leaned forward, closer to the camera, and for a moment he looked exactly like the father she remembered from this cabin, from this porch, from every quiet moment that had nothing to do with money. Trust yourself, sweetheart. You were always smarter than you believed. The video ended.
The cabin was completely silent except for the wind moving through the pines outside and Savannah sitting very still, pressing her fingers together in her lap, not ready yet to let anyone, even Vincent, see her face. The envelope contained a single brass key and a handwritten note with one line, Cabinet 7, Sub-Basement. Go before they do. They drove back to the city that same night. The plan was simple. Retrieve the evidence from Hayes Industries headquarters early the following morning, before the building filled with people who might be watching. Vincent would handle access. Savannah would handle the archive room, which required a family biometric clearance that even Vincent's network couldn't replicate. Simple. Clean. 2 days maximum. Then Ethan's invitation arrived. It came as a formal card hand-delivered to Savannah's apartment the next morning, cream-colored with gold embossing. The Hayes family annual charity gala, rescheduled in Richard's honor, hosted by Ethan Hayes himself. Black tie, Friday evening, the city's most prominent venue. Your attendance is expected, it read at the bottom. Not requested, expected. Savannah set the card on her kitchen table and looked at it. He's controlling the timeline, she told Vincent when he arrived. If we disappear into the headquarters archive the day before his gala, he'll know we're close to something. He's using the event to watch us. Or, Vincent said, picking up the card, he's using it to move something while everyone is watching us instead. He set it back down. Either way, we go. And the archive? After the gala, his eyes met hers. 2 more days won't change the evidence, but missing that gala might tell him exactly how much we know. She didn't love it, but she understood it. The gala was everything Richard Hayes would have hated. Chandeliers dripping crystal, waitstaff in white gloves, a string quartet playing in the corner while people in expensive clothing circulated with expensive champagne and talked about charitable giving without any apparent intention of being charitable. The venue was the top floor of the Aldrich Tower, floor-to-ceiling glass, the city spread below like a circuit board lit from within. Savannah wore a deep green gown she'd bought the same week she opened her bakery, for a date that never happened. It still fit. Vincent arrived in black tie that looked less like a costume and more like armor. They worked the room the way Vincent seemed to do everything, deliberately, without wasted motion. Savannah smiled and accepted condolences about her father and deflected questions about the inheritance, while Vincent stood slightly at her side, reading every face in the room over her shoulder. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then she went to find the restroom. The corridor beyond the main hall was quieter, marble-floored, lined with private meeting rooms whose frosted glass doors glowed with dim interior light. Savannah was passing the second door when she heard it, her cousin's voice, low and clipped, the tone Ethan used when he wasn't performing for an audience. She stopped. 30 days is too long. The window closes if she gets to the archive. A pause. I don't care what it costs. I need those files moved before Sunday. Another voice, one she didn't recognize, responded too quietly to make out the words. She's already closer than she should be, Ethan continued. And DeLuca. A sharp exhale. He's the problem. He's always been the problem. My uncle should never have. The floor creaked under Savannah's heel.
The voices stopped. She moved immediately, turning back toward the main hall, walking at a pace that was just slightly too fast for someone simply returning from the powder room. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. She had heard enough. Not everything, but enough. Ethan wasn't reacting to the investigation. He'd been running from it for years. And he knew about Vincent. Had known, possibly, long before the estate. She was 10 feet from the main hall entrance when a hand closed around her arm. She spun. Ethan stood behind her, black tie, champagne glass still in hand, wearing the smile that had always made her slightly uncomfortable without being able to explain why. "Savannah," he said warmly, "I've been looking for you." "Ethan," she kept her voice even. "Lovely gala. You look pale." He tilted his head. "Were you lost?" "Not at all." His grip on her arm hadn't loosened. It wasn't painful, just present. A reminder.
"I think we should talk," he said, privately. "There are things about your father's company that you should understand before you make decisions you can't take back."
"I'd love to," she said. "Let me find Vincent first." The smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. "Of course." He released her arm. She walked into the main hall and didn't run, which took everything she had. She found Vincent in 30 seconds. He found her in 20, already moving toward her before she reached him, reading something in her face that she hadn't said aloud. "We need to leave," she said quietly. "I know." His hand came to the small of her back. "Don't look toward the east corridor." She didn't. "Why?" "Because there are 4 men in that direction who weren't on the guest list," he said, already steering them toward the far exit, "and they've been watching you for the last 11 minutes. They were 6 steps from the exit when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a malfunction. All of them, simultaneously. In the darkness, Savannah heard Ethan's voice carry clearly across the room, calm, instructional, meant for someone other than her. "Now," he said. They went out through the kitchen. Vincent moved like he'd memorized the building's layout before he ever walked through the front door, which, Savannah realized, he probably had. Through the service corridor, past startled catering staff, down a freight elevator that smelled of industrial cleaner, and into a basement parking structure where a car was already waiting, engine running, a man in a dark jacket behind the wheel who asked no questions. Behind them, on the floors above, she could hear the controlled chaos of the gala unraveling, shouting, the sound of furniture overturned, Ethan's men searching a room that no longer contained what they were looking for. She didn't speak until they were on the highway, the city falling behind them. "He said now," she said. "I heard." "He planned that. The whole gala. It wasn't a social event." She pressed her fingers against her temple. "He invited us there to take us off the board. He was never going to let us leave that building." "No," Vincent agreed. "He wasn't." The car moved through the night. She watched the city lights thin and then disappear as they turned onto roads she didn't recognize, heading somewhere she hadn't been told about yet. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere Ethan doesn't know exists," Vincent said. The lake house materialized out of the darkness, like something imagined rather than built. Low, wide, set back from the water's edge behind a wall of birch trees, every window dark until Vincent's driver finished the headlights, and Vincent pressed a code into a panel by the front door, and the interior lights came on softly, one room at a time. No staff, no security detail waiting inside, just the house, the lake, and the sound of water moving quietly against the dock in the dark. "You own this?" Savannah asked. "I needed a place that didn't exist on paper," he said. "This is it." She walked inside. The house was simple in the way that expensive things sometimes are. Clean lines, natural materials, nothing performative about it. Bookshelves with books that had actually been read. A kitchen stocked as if someone had called ahead. A fireplace already laid with wood, needing only a match. It felt, strangely, like the cabin, like somewhere a person came to be honest. They stayed 3 days. The first day was logistics. Vincent's team worked remotely, tracking Ethan's movements, securing the path back to the headquarters archive. Savannah spent it on the phone with the lead attorney, carefully, saying nothing that revealed how much she knew, confirming the 30-day timeline was still intact. She was professional, calm. She hung up and sat quietly for a long time afterward. The second day, the rain came and didn't leave. With nothing to do but wait and the lake hidden behind a wall of gray, they existed in the house together in a way that felt different from everything that had come before. No gala, no legal documents, no armed men in corridors, just rain on the roof and coffee going cold on the kitchen counter, and two people who had been moving so fast they hadn't had a moment to simply stop. Vincent cooked, which surprised her. Not elaborately, pasta, simple sauce, bread from the pantry, but with the focused attention he gave everything, as if no task was beneath doing properly. She sat at the kitchen counter and watched him. "You fund hospitals," she said eventually. It wasn't a question. She'd found a folder in the car, left carelessly, or perhaps not carelessly at all. Veterans programs, 3 orphanages in the Midwest. He didn't turn around. "Your father talked. My father's ledger talked." She folded her hands on the counter. "You've been doing it for years, quietly. No press, no naming rights. Naming rights are for people who need the credit. Why do you do it?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down the wooden spoon and turned around, leaning back against the counter with his arms crossed. Not defensively, just the posture of a man choosing his words with care. "My father built something ugly," he said. "Effective, profitable, and completely ugly. I inherited it at 26 and told myself I could run it differently." A beat. "I was wrong about how differently, but I wasn't wrong about wanting to." She looked at him. "The hospitals and the orphanages," he continued, "don't fix what the other side of my life has cost people. I know that. But they're real. They exist." Something shifted in his expression, not quite vulnerability, but the thing that lives just beside it. Some days that's enough to keep the accounting from being entirely one-sided. The rain was loud on the roof for a moment. "You told me you never intended to fall in love again," Savannah said quietly. He went still. "You didn't say that to me," she added. "I heard you on the phone. The second night, you thought I was asleep." The silence between them changed texture entirely. "Savannah, I'm not staying because of the inheritance," she said. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens with Hayes Industries, whatever Ethan does next, that's not why I'm still here." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. The careful, measuring look she had learned meant he was deciding how much of himself to let into the room. Then he crossed the kitchen, pulled out the stool beside her, and sat down close enough that their arms touched, exactly the way they had that first night at the estate, in that reading room, in front of a family that wanted her to fail. "I know," he said quietly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Outside, the rain kept falling. The lake stayed hidden. And for one evening, the contract that had started everything sat forgotten in a drawer somewhere, long since irrelevant to either of them. They returned to the city on a Thursday, quietly, without announcement, slipping back into the grid the way Vincent did everything, through side doors and secondary routes, nothing that would show up on a camera Ethan's people might be watching. By Friday morning, Savannah was in position outside Hayes Industries headquarters, the brass key from the cabin envelope in her palm. Vincent's earpiece fitted so naturally she'd almost stopped noticing it. "Archive room is sub-basement 2, Vincent said through it. "Biometric scanner at the stairwell door. After that, it's yours alone. My access stops at the lobby level." "I know the building," she said. "I know you do. I'm just talking because you're nervous." She almost smiled. "I'm not nervous." "Your hand has been in your coat pocket for 11 minutes. She took her hand out of her pocket. The sub-basement was exactly as she remembered from childhood visits to the building. Cold, fluorescent lit, the particular silence of a room where paper goes to be forgotten. Filing cabinets in long rows, labeled by year and division, the air carrying the faint chemical smell of old documents and archival sleeves. Cabinet 7 was at the far end. The brass key fit without resistance. Inside were 3 sealed folders, each labeled in her father's handwriting with nothing but a date. She took all 3, slid them into the document bag she'd brought, locked the cabinet, and was back in the stairwell in under 4 minutes. She pressed her earpiece. "I have them." "Good," Vincent said. "Now walk out the same way you came in. Don't—" A pause. Brief, but she'd learned to read his pauses. "Don't use the main lobby." "What happened?" "Ethan's attorney just entered the building, front entrance. He has 2 men with him." She was already moving toward the service exit. They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks away, neutral, crowded, anonymous. Vincent was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table with sightlines to both exits, coffee in front of him that he wasn't drinking. She opened the first folder. What was inside wasn't complicated, it was just complete. 6 years of financial records, transfers, shell company structures, names, real names, not initials, and transaction logs that connected Hayes Industries' legitimate subsidiaries directly to a money laundering network that stretched across 4 states. The documentation was meticulous, the kind only a man who had spent 30 years in business knew how to build and preserve. The primary name appearing across every major transaction was Ethan Hayes, but the second name stopped her cold. Marcus Webb, Hayes Industries' lead attorney. The same attorney responsible for verifying the marriage condition. The same man who held the legal power to approve or block her inheritance entirely. "Webb is involved," she said. Vincent looked at the page. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A rapid, silent recalculation. "That's why Ethan wasn't just trying to pressure you out. He had the legal mechanism to block you regardless. If Webb rules the marriage invalid, the inheritance goes to Ethan by default." Vincent sat back. Ethan didn't need to frighten you into walking away. He just needed to stall long enough for Webb to find a legal reason to void the condition. He looked at her steadily. "We have 4 days left on the 30-day window." 4 days. She looked down at the documents. Everything her father had built, preserved in 3 folders in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building someone had spent 6 years systematically stealing from. "We move tonight," she said. They didn't move tonight, because at 6 p.m. Savannah's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize and a voice she did. Marcus Webb. Strained, speaking quickly, background noise that sounded like an enclosed space. "Ms. Hayes, I need you to listen carefully. I want you to understand. I am not calling willingly." A breath. "Ethan has been aware of my cooperation with your father's documentation for approximately 48 hours. There are men here. He wants the folders returned and the inheritance claim formally withdrawn by tomorrow morning, or he—" The call ended, not disconnected, ended from Webb's side, as if the phone had been removed from his hand. Savannah looked at Vincent. "He took Webb," she said. "Yes." "Which means he knows we have the documents." "Yes." "And he's using Webb as leverage to get them back." Vincent was already on his feet, already pulling out his own phone, already shifting into the mode she'd watched him operate in during the bakery and the gala. Calm, contracting inward to something harder and more precise. "Webb may be compromised," he said, "but he's still the only attorney with the legal authority to validate the inheritance. If Ethan removes him permanently—" "Then it doesn't matter what those documents prove," Savannah finished. "There's no one left to rule in my favor." "We have tonight," Vincent said. "That's all." She stood, picked up the document bag, thought of her father sitting in that cabin, recording a video for a daughter he was trying to protect from a distance, across time, from beyond a death he must have known was coming sooner than it should. She thought of a 7-year-old girl holding a fish, grinning until her eyes disappeared. "Trust yourself, sweetheart. Tell me what you need from me," she said. Vincent looked at her with something she hadn't seen on his face before. Not calculation, not protectiveness, but something quieter and more absolute than either. "Stay close," he said, "and trust me." "Always," she said, and she meant it in every possible way.
Hayes Industries' headquarters at night was a different building entirely. Empty corridors, security lights casting everything in pale amber, the hum of servers in distant rooms, the occasional click of a cooling system, the particular silence of a place that exists to hold power and feels it most when no one is watching. Vincent's team entered through 3 separate access points simultaneously: service entrance, parking structure, and a fire exit on the building's north side, whose alarm had been quietly disabled 40 minutes earlier by a man Vincent trusted with exactly this kind of work. No weapons drawn, no unnecessary noise, the kind of operation that left no footage worth keeping and no story worth telling afterward. Savannah went in through the front door. Her biometric clearance still worked. Her name was still on the building. Whatever Ethan had planned, he hadn't thought to remove her access, or perhaps he'd been too confident that Webb's leverage would make tonight unnecessary. That confidence was his first mistake. They found Webb on the 4th floor, in a conference room that had been locked from the outside. He was unharmed, but pale, his tie loosened, the look of a man who had spent several hours understanding how badly he had miscalculated his own position. 2 of Ethan's men sat outside the door, until they didn't, Vincent's team handling the transition with a brisk efficiency that Savannah didn't witness and didn't ask about. She opened the conference room door herself. Webb looked up. Something moved across his face: relief, shame, the complicated expression of a man who had been on the wrong side of something and knew it. "Ms. Hayes," he said.
"Mr. Webb." She set the document bag on the table in front of him. "We can discuss your involvement later. Right now, I need you functional." He straightened, nodded. Whatever else Marcus Webb was, he was a lawyer, and lawyers, she had learned, default to composure when given the option. Ethan was on the 7th floor. They knew because Vincent's man tracking building access had watched him enter 90 minutes earlier and hadn't watched him leave. He was up there with 2 associates, waiting for a phone call that was never going to come from Webb, growing aware by degrees that the evening was not proceeding according to his design. Vincent took the stairs. Savannah followed. She expected confrontation, shouting perhaps, the theatrical unraveling of a man who had spent years building something criminal and was now watching it come apart. Instead, they found Ethan standing at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a glass of her father's scotch in his hand, the bottle taken from Richard's private office cabinet, which said everything about who Ethan Hayes had always believed himself to be. He heard them enter and didn't turn around immediately. "I wondered how long," he said finally, to the window. "Ethan?" Savannah's voice was steady. "Step away from the window." He turned then, looked at her first, then at Vincent, then back at her with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, something other than calculation. Something that might have been, in another life, regret. "He built all of this for you," Ethan said. "You know that? Every decision, every clause in that ridiculous will, all of it pointed at you." A beat. "He never pointed anything at me." "You stole from him for 6 years, Savannah said quietly.
"I built for him for 15. His jaw tightened. That counted for nothing.
"It would have counted for everything if you'd let it." The silence lasted exactly long enough. Then Ethan moved, not toward them, but toward the desk, reaching for something in the drawer, fast enough that Vincent was already across the room, hand on Ethan's wrist, the drawer stopping 6 inches open. Inside was a passport, a drive, a document transferring a significant portion of Hayes' assets into an offshore account. He hadn't been waiting for Webb's call. He'd been preparing to run. Vincent removed his hand, stepped back, let Ethan see that running had also, quietly, been accounted for, that the two men now visible in the doorway behind them was simply the confirmation of that fact. Ethan set the Scotch glass down very carefully on the desk and sat. The police arrived within the hour. Federal financial investigators followed shortly after, the documents from Cabinet 7 already digitally transmitted to 3 separate agencies by web, who had spent the intervening time doing the only thing that might meaningfully reduce his own exposure. Ethan was arrested without drama, no shouting, no final speech. He walked out between 2 federal agents looking smaller than Savannah had ever seen him look. Not dangerous anymore, just a man who had made a long series of choices and arrived at their natural conclusion. She watched from the lobby. Vincent stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched. "Are you all right?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said, and meant it. 30 days after a desperate woman approached a stranger at a window and whispered a request that changed everything, the lawyers gathered at Hayes family vineyard for the final inheritance confirmation. The morning was clear and warm. Light moving through the vineyard rose in long golden sheets, the kind of morning that feels like it was arranged rather than arrived at naturally. Savannah sat across from the attorney, a new one, recommended by Webb in a gesture of cooperative goodwill, and answered his questions calmly. Charitable legacy, transparent restructuring, new executive appointments already in progress. Then he looked up from his papers. "One final matter," he said, with the careful neutrality of a man doing his job. "The marriage condition. I need to confirm, for the record, was the arrangement entered into contractually?" The room was quiet. Vincent, seated beside her, said nothing. She felt him go still in the way she had learned meant he was leaving the answer entirely to her. She looked at the attorney. Then she smiled. Not the composed, controlled smile she'd worn through 30 days of legal proceedings and family chaos and boardroom politics. The real one. The one that, apparently, made her eyes disappear. "The contract ended weeks ago," she said. "The marriage didn't." The attorney made his note, the inheritance transferred, and that evening, as the sun moved low over the vineyard and the light turned the color of warm honey, Savannah and Vincent stood between the rows of vines her father had planted 20 years ago with a quiet stubbornness that had apparently run in the family. No grand ceremony, no guest list engineered for appearances, a handful of people who actually mattered. Otto, who cried without embarrassment, Maya from the bakery, 2 of Vincent's men who stood at the edges looking uncomfortable in their suits and moved when the moment called for it. The officiant asked the questions ceremonies have always asked. Vincent answered without hesitation, without performance, without any of the careful measuring of words she had watched him do in every other significant moment. Just directly, plainly, the way a man speaks when he has decided that honesty is no longer something to be rationed. She answered the same way. When it was done, he touched her face with the same hand that had produced a wedding ring from his pocket on a night when she was panicking and the room was full of people waiting for her to fail. And he looked at her the way she had first noticed him looking at things, completely, without distraction. "You know," she said quietly, "you still order mushrooms." "You still hate them," he said, "every time." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "I order them anyway." She laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere genuine, unexpected, a little embarrassing. And he kissed her in the vineyard her father had planted, in the light that felt arranged, while Otto cried and Maya took photographs, and 2 large men in uncomfortable suits looked quietly at the ground and pretended they weren't moved. What had begun as a desperate whispered request in a crowded hallway, "Please pretend to be my husband tonight," had become the one promise neither of them ever wanted to break. Not because of an inheritance, not because of a contract, but because some things, once real, simply refused to go back to being pretend.